For nearly 2 months, America has heard the same disturbing question. How could 16 children live inside one small Ohio house without almost anyone knowing they were there? But now, prosecutors have revealed something that changes the entire story. Police did not originally go to that house looking for those 16 children. They were following a child sexual abuse investigation. They were looking for evidence connected to Gary Siders Jr. And according to the prosecutor, investigators were specifically seeking his DNA. That raises a new question. What had investigators learned that made Gary Jr.'s DNA so important? Because when officers finally arrived at the house on June 30th, what they discovered opened an entirely different investigation. 16 children, unsafe conditions, 4 adults arrested, and now, nearly 2 months later, felony sex crime indictments against Gary Jr. and his wife, Elizabeth. But even that is not the full story. Authorities have now confirmed that the case actually involves 3 connected criminal investigations. The first began months before anyone knew about the children. The second led investigators to Gary and Elizabeth. And the third began the moment police entered that house. To understand how those 3 investigations came together, we have to go back to December 2025. That was when the Vinton County Sheriff's Office asked the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation to examine allegations of sexual abuse involving 2 children. BCI's Special Victims Unit took the case. At that point, the investigation was not focused on the 16 children who would later be found in Hamden. It centered on allegations involving 2 other men, 23-year-old Josh Saunders and 40-year-old Brandon Henderson Sr. On August 21st, a Vinton County grand jury returned indictments against both men. Saunders was indicted on 3 counts of rape and 1 count of gross sexual imposition. Henderson was indicted on 21 counts involving allegations of child endangerment, gross sexual imposition, and sexual battery. These are criminal allegations. Neither man has been convicted, and every defendant discussed in this case is presumed innocent unless proven guilty in court. But something happened during that first investigation. Investigators obtained information that pointed them somewhere else, toward Gary Siders Jr. and toward Elizabeth Siders. That information was important enough that in March 2026, BCI opened a second investigation. This one involved allegations of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. And this is where the timeline takes a dramatic turn. Because for weeks after the children were discovered, many people believed police had gone to the Siders' home because Gary Jr. was facing separate public indecency allegations. That explanation appeared repeatedly in early reporting. But prosecutors have now revealed that something much more serious was happening behind the scenes. Vinton County prosecutor William Archer said authorities were seeking Gary Jr.'s DNA in connection with a child sexual abuse investigation. Investigators obtained a search warrant. Then, on June 30th, law enforcement went to 182 Omer Street in Hamden, Ohio. They were not simply checking on the children. They were pursuing evidence in a separate case. And that distinction changes everything. Because imagine the sequence. Investigators begin with allegations involving 2 children. That case produces information about another possible crime. That information leads to Gary and Elizabeth. Investigators then decide they need Gary Jr.'s DNA. A court authorizes a search. Officers arrive at his home. And when they enter, they discover 16 children. A completely different case suddenly explodes into view. The children ranged in age from approximately 18 months to 18 years old. Authorities described the conditions inside the home as horrific. Earlier reports said many of the children were found crowded into a small room contaminated with human waste. Several required significant medical attention. Some were hospitalized. For neighbors in the small village of Hamden, the discovery was almost impossible to understand. 16 children living inside one house. Yet residents said they rarely, if ever, saw them. People who lived nearby said they had walked the street for years without realizing that so many children were inside. That mystery immediately became the center of the story. How could 16 children remain almost invisible? But the latest indictments reveal something even more important. The discovery of those children was not the beginning of the investigation. It was the result of another investigation already in motion. And once the children were found, authorities opened what is now described as Investigation 3. That third case focuses on how the children were allegedly treated inside the home, and the new indictments are much more detailed than the original charges. Gary Siders Jr., the children's father, has now been indicted on 19 child endangering counts. Elizabeth Siders, their mother, also faces 19. Christina Siders, their paternal grandmother, faces 19. Gary Siders Sr., their paternal grandfather, faces 16. And the charges range from misdemeanors to serious felonies. But one phrase in the new announcement is especially important. Prosecutors alleged the children suffered serious physical harm. That represents a significant development. When the 4 adults were first arrested, much of the public information focused on the conditions authorities said they found inside the house. Now, a grand jury has reviewed evidence presented by prosecutors and returned a new set of indictments. And prosecutors are alleging harm beyond simply living in an unsafe environment. There is another legal detail worth understanding. Some of these new child endangerment charges are what prosecutors call charges in the alternative. That means different counts may describe different legal theories involving the same alleged conduct. It does not necessarily mean prosecutors are accusing one defendant of 19 completely separate incidents. That distinction matters because the numbers in this case can otherwise become misleading. But while the child endangerment charges are serious, they were not the biggest surprise announced on August 21st. The biggest surprise involved Gary Jr. and Elizabeth. Both are now facing felony sex crime charges from the second investigation. Gary Jr. was indicted on 2 counts of sexual battery and 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. Elizabeth was indicted on the same 4 charges. Prosecutors allege the conduct happened between January and September of 2022. They say the alleged victim was a minor more than 10 years younger than Gary and Elizabeth. Authorities also made one detail very clear. The alleged victim was not a member of their immediate family. That statement is important because this case has generated enormous speculation online. Authorities have not publicly identified the alleged victim. They have not explained the exact relationship between the victim and the defendants, and they have not publicly described every connection between Gary and Elizabeth and the 2 men charged in the first investigation. Those unanswered questions are where speculation becomes dangerous, because the confirmed facts are already disturbing enough. There is no need to invent connections investigators have not made, and authorities have specifically said this is not a human trafficking case. That needs to be repeated. No trafficking operation has been alleged. No such charge appears in the announced indictments. What investigators have described is a chain of connected investigations involving allegations of sexual abuse, unlawful sexual conduct, and child endangerment. And that chain now looks much clearer. Investigation 1, December 2025. BCI begins examining allegations of sexual abuse involving 2 children. That investigation eventually results in charges against Saunders and Henderson. But investigators also obtain information pointing toward Gary Jr. and Elizabeth. Investigation 2, March 2026. BCI opens another case involving alleged unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. Authorities seek evidence connected to Gary Jr. According to Prosecutor Archer, they seek his DNA. Then comes June 30th. Law enforcement executes the search warrant at Omer Street, and that creates Investigation 3. Because inside that house, officers find the 16 children. 3 investigations, 3 different starting points, but one connected chain. And there is another detail that now deserves renewed attention. Dollar General. Prosecutor Archer has publicly credited employees at a Dollar General store with alerting authorities after becoming concerned about children they had observed. Exactly what those employees saw has not been publicly detailed. That is appropriate. The alleged victims are children. Their identities deserve protection. But it appears that despite the children's near invisibility to many people in the community, someone noticed something was wrong. Someone paid attention, and someone contacted authorities. At the same time, BCI investigators were following the sexual abuse allegations. Those 2 pieces of the story eventually intersected with the investigation that brought police to Omer Street. What happened after June 30th created another crisis. Vinton County is small. Its population is only a fraction of what a major Ohio city handles. Suddenly, local officials had responsibility for 16 children who needed medical evaluations, housing, supervision, and long-term services. The situation became so financially serious that Ohio approved $1 million in emergency funding to help with the children's care. The county prosecutor also sought additional resources. Officials began pursuing permanent custody of the children, and the criminal cases against the 4 adults started moving through court. Then came another complication: questions about whether the defendants are competent to stand trial. Competency evaluations have now been ordered for all 4 original defendants. For Elizabeth Siders and Gary Siders Sr., courts have also ordered evaluations related to possible insanity defenses. Those are 2 different legal questions. Competency asks whether a defendant currently understands the court proceedings and can assist an attorney in preparing a defense. An insanity evaluation looks at the defendant's mental condition at the time of the alleged offense. Neither evaluation automatically means a defendant will avoid trial, and neither establishes guilt or innocence. The results will help determine how the legal process moves forward. Gary Siders Sr. has also been released on a recognizance bond because of significant medical issues. He remains subject to court conditions, including GPS monitoring. The others have remained in custody as their cases proceed. But while these courtroom questions matter, they do not answer the biggest mystery created by the latest announcement. Why did investigators need Gary Jr.'s DNA? Authorities have not publicly provided the complete answer. What they have said is that the DNA search was connected to a child sexual abuse investigation. What they have not publicly disclosed is precisely what evidence caused investigators to seek that DNA. Was there physical evidence they wanted to compare? Was there information from an alleged victim? Was there information obtained from someone involved in the first investigation? Those possibilities have not been confirmed, and until authorities release more evidence, they remain questions, not facts. But whatever investigators had learned was significant enough to seek court authorization. And that search ultimately brought officers to the house where the 16 children were found. That is why the DNA question matters so much. It connects the hidden investigation before June 30th with the case the public has been watching ever since. And it raises another troubling question. If that first sexual abuse investigation had never begun, when would authorities have found the children? Would someone else eventually have reported the house? Would the Dollar General concerns alone have triggered intervention? Would the children have remained there for months or years? There is no confirmed answer. But we do know authorities had previous opportunities to encounter parts of this family's history. Earlier court records showed that several children connected to Gary and Elizabeth had accumulated extensive school absences years before the Hamden discovery. Complaints were filed. Those cases were later dismissed after officials were unable to locate the parents. That does not prove the criminal allegations now pending. It does, however, add another layer to the central question surrounding this case. How did a family with so many children remain so difficult to track? Authorities said in July that members of the family had lived in multiple Ohio counties since 2008. Investigators also said the family appeared to have largely avoided creating medical and other government records. For years, pieces of the family's story may have existed in different places. School records, court complaints, observations from people in stores, police information, and eventually allegations from a completely separate sexual abuse investigation. The question is when those separate pieces finally became one picture. According to the newly released timeline, that happened in 2026. December produced the first investigation. March produced the second. June 30th produced the discovery. August 21st produced the indictments. And Ohio Attorney General Andy Wilson has now made one thing clear. Investigators are not finished. He described the indictments as the latest developments in ongoing investigations and said BCI continues working with the Vinton County Sheriff's Office. That does not mean more charges are guaranteed. It does not mean more suspects will necessarily emerge. And it does not mean every unanswered question will result in another criminal case. But it does mean authorities are still following evidence. For now, 5 major questions remain. What information from the first investigation led investigators to Gary and Elizabeth? Why was Gary Jr.'s DNA needed? What evidence was recovered when police searched the Omer Street home? What is the precise connection between the three investigations? And could investigators identify additional alleged victims as the case continues? Authorities have not answered those questions publicly. Part of the reason may be the sensitivity of the case. Children are involved. Multiple defendants are awaiting court proceedings. Competency questions remain unresolved, and judges have imposed restrictions on what some of the parties can publicly discuss. That means this case may develop more slowly than the public expects. There may be long periods when investigators say very little, but the August indictments have already revealed something fundamental. The story America first learned on June 30th was not really the beginning. The beginning was months earlier. It started with allegations involving two children. Investigators followed those allegations. They found information that led somewhere else. They opened a second investigation. They sought evidence connected to Gary Siders Jr. Then they walked through the door of a house in Hamden, and behind that door were 16 children. That single search turned one investigation into three. It exposed conditions no one outside the investigation seemed prepared for. It triggered one of the most disturbing child endangerment cases Ohio has seen in recent memory, and now it has produced a new set of felony sex crime indictments. But the question that could explain how all of these pieces became connected remains unanswered. What exactly did investigators discover that made Gary Siders Jr.'s DNA so important? Until that answer becomes public, one of the most important pieces of the Ohio House of Horrors case is still missing.